Today I am sharing 5 quick and easy freezer meals for you that you are going to be able to pull out of that freezer and cook them for your family on a busy holiday night. All of the freezer meals that I'm putting together today come out of this book. This is called Seriously Good Freezer Meals. I have a wide variety of meals that I will be sharing with you. I have a delicious soup, 2 pasta meals, but they are very different from each other, a delicious Mongolian beef, and some honey pork chops. All right, let's get started. To start out with the Mongolian beef, I have added 1 cup of brown sugar to a bowl, 1 cup of tamari sauce, and 1 cup of water. Now I am doubling the sauce, but I will have the recipe in its original form linked below. To a skillet, I have added about a tablespoon of vegetable oil. I'm gonna let that heat up for just a minute. I added 4 tablespoons of garlic minced and 2 teaspoons of ginger. I'm gonna let this cook in that oil until the ginger is just slightly browned. After the garlic and ginger has cooked for a little bit, I'm going to add that sauce into the pan. I'm going to let this cook together for about 2 to 3 minutes until the sauce thickens just a little bit. The recipe calls for flank steak, but we're using roast cut into thin strips. So we've added a 1/2 cup of cornstarch to a bowl, and we are lightly dipping each strip into the cornstarch and placing it in oil in our electric fry pan, and then letting it crisp up around the edges, and then we're gonna pull it out, and I have to get a paper towel on here, but we're gonna lay it out on top of paper towel on a plate and let it drain. If you're freezing this meal, it will be set up like a kit. So the meat will be in one part of a freezer bag, and the sauce and green beans would be in another bag. So we dumped the oil out of our electric fry pan. I wiped it out pretty good. I put about a tablespoon of vegetable oil in it. I'm heating it back up, and I also added a bag of frozen green beans. You can also use fresh if you choose. I'm gonna let these cook up and crisp up a little bit in that oil. I added the beef to the pan with the green beans, and now I'm gonna pour the sauce in over top of the beef and the vegetables, and I'm gonna let this simmer together for a few minutes. I have browned up and scrambled 2 pounds of burger. I did put a little salt and pepper on that as well. I'm gonna add a pack of taco seasoning. It says about 1/4 cup. I think that should be about a 1/4 cup. We'll say yes. And then I am adding a cup of water to that. I'm gonna let this simmer together and pick up the flavors of this taco seasoning for a little bit. Meanwhile, I have brought a pan of water up to a boil, and I do have a little bit of olive oil in there so these shells don't stick. I'm going to very carefully pour the box of shells into the pan, and I'm going to let these cook for probably about 6 minutes, just until they're tender. And then I'm gonna rinse them in cold water. I have my little workstation going on here because when I stuff shells, I like to kind of just have everything around me and try to have it go quickly. So I brought the pan of burger over here with the taco seasoning in it. I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of mozzarella and a 1/2 cup of cheddar cheese to the burger. If you are freezing this meal, you are going to want to use an aluminum pan. Now I'm pouring a 1/2 cup of enchilada sauce into the bottom of the pan, and I have sprayed it. Once the shells are all stuffed with the taco meat, I am going to pour 2 cups of enchilada sauce over the shells. Now I'm going to sprinkle 1 cup of cheddar cheese over the top and 1 cup of mozzarella over the top of everything. I have my oven preheated to 375. If you are freezing this dish, you would cover your pan with aluminum foil and make sure to write the instructions on the top. I have my oven preheated to 375. I'm gonna bake this for 30 to 35 minutes. So we just pulled this out of the oven. It took about 30 minutes. And you can top this with some chopped tomato, cilantro if you choose, and sour cream. Also on the side, a salad would be perfect along with some garlic bread. To a blender, I have added a 1/4 cup of honey, 2 tablespoons of tamari sauce, 1 shallot quartered, 1/2 teaspoon of minced or grated garlic, I used minced, 1/2 teaspoon of grated ginger, an 1/8 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. I am going to blend this sauce until it is smooth. This recipe calls for 6 pork chops. If you are freezing this meal, you would add the pork chops to a gallon-sized freezer bag and pour the sauce over top of the pork chops. Let them freeze and you're all ready to go. I am making these for dinner tonight. Let me show you how to prepare these for dinner. I'm heating up a little bit of olive oil in a skillet and I am going to sear both sides of each pork chop. As I do this, I'm going to add them to a 9x13 baking pan and I have my oven preheated on 350. These are fresh out of the oven and we did check them with a meat thermometer and they are ready for us to serve up. In a bowl, I am adding a 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, a 1/4 cup of Panko, and a 1/2 teaspoon of seasoning salt. I'm going to give this all a good stir and I'm going to set this aside because this is going to be the delicious topping that goes on top of this dish. In a bowl, I am going to pour in some Alfredo sauce. I'm using the Bertolli Alfredo sauce and 1 cup of milk. I'm going to pour the sauce into a lightly greased pan. If you are freezing this meal, you would use an aluminum pan. While my water is coming up to a boil for the jumbo shell pasta, I have another bowl, and in this bowl I am going to add 1½ cups of fresh shredded Parmesan, 1/2 cup of pesto, 1½ teaspoons of minced garlic, about 3 cups of cooked, they say shredded, I didn't shred mine, I diced it, chicken, some salt and pepper to taste, and an 8-ounce cream cheese softened. I'm going to stir all of these ingredients really well together and break up that cream cheese a little bit. This is what I'm going to stuff the shells with. I am boiling the jumbo shells for about 5 minutes and I'm going to test them. They are supposed to be softened but still have a good bite to them. My shells ended up taking about 6 to 6.5 minutes. I think they're perfect. They still have a bite, but they're soft enough for me to work with. Now I am rinsing them in cool water to get that temperature to drop before I handle them and get them stuffed. So here is my working station. I have the pan of sauce sitting here. The topping is back here. The stuffing is here, and the pasta is here. So I'm gonna work going this way. The recipe says to put it in the pan and turn them in the sauce. Just gonna drizzle some of that sauce over top of each one. Okay, so I ended up getting 27 shells out of this. Maybe I would have gotten the whole 30 like the recipe calls for if I'd used shredded chicken, not sure, but my pan is full. So now I am going to sprinkle that topping all over these shells. This already smells good and it hasn't even started cooking. This would be a wonderful meal to pull out of your freezer during the holidays if you have friends or family coming over, somebody that's not expected, you could just whip this beautiful meal right out of your freezer and be like, oh yeah, I've been cooking all day and prepared this. This is definitely going to be an impressive dinner. If you are freezing this meal, at this point you would wrap your aluminum pan with plastic wrap, sealing it tightly, and then over the top of the plastic wrap you would put aluminum foil and make sure that the edges are down tight all the way around. Then you would label it and put your instructions on top of the aluminum foil. I am going to bake mine tonight. I have my oven set to 400 degrees and it is going to bake for 25 to 30 minutes. This took about 25 minutes. It come out hot and bubbly. It smells amazing. And we're gonna have salad on the side, but you could also have garlic bread, would be perfect with this too. So the recipe says to use breakfast sausage with the casings on. You can take them out of the casings, but I just bought mine in a pack by Jimmy Dean, and I am going to cut this in half because this is going to be the mini meatballs in the soup. So I'm going to cut that in half. I'm actually going to cut it again. And then just cut little portions. I'm using a disposable bowl because I'm going to throw this away afterwards. But I have 2 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese and 2 tablespoons of Italian breadcrumbs in the bowl, and I have stirred them together, taking a section of that sausage, and I am going to make that into a meatball. Then I am just going to roll it in the cheese and breadcrumb, and I'm going to place it in a frying pan with a little olive oil in it. I'm going to continue working like this until all of the meatballs are in that frying pan. I'm going to cook the meatballs until they are thoroughly cooked all the way through. After the meatballs have cooked through, I am going to remove them from the pan and I'm going to set these aside. I have chopped up about a cup of carrots and a small onion. I'm going to add that to the pan that I just cooked the sausage into. I did drain some of that grease out of that pan. I'm going to cook these up until they soften. After the carrots and onions have softened a little bit, I am adding 2 teaspoons of garlic to the pan. I have set the carrots and onions aside to cool a little bit. I have brought some water up to a boil. I did add a little olive oil so the pasta doesn't stick together, and I'm using 2 cups of fusilli pasta. I am only gonna cook this pasta for just a few minutes, just till it starts to soften, and then I'm gonna pull it off of that stove. I drained and rinsed the pasta in cold water. If you were to freeze this meal, you would take a gallon-sized freezer bag and you would add the carrots and onion and garlic, the meatballs, 2 tablespoons of pesto, 1/4 teaspoon of dried thyme, and 1/4 teaspoon of hot pepper flakes, 2 cans of cannellini beans drained and rinsed, 6 cups of chicken broth, the pasta, and a cup of chopped kale. You would remove as much air as possible out of the bag and you would stick it in your freezer. But I'm going to continue making this soup for tonight's dinner. I am starting out by adding the carrot and onion mixture. Next, I'm going to toss in the meatballs, 6 cups of chicken broth, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper flakes, and 1/4 teaspoon of thyme. I wasn't supposed to add the meatballs yet, but I think it's going to be perfectly fine. I rinsed and drained the cannellini beans. I'm adding that to the pot, and I'm going to bring this up to a boil. Now that the soup has come up to a boil, I'm adding the 2 tablespoons of pesto, pasta, the kale. I'm going to season this up with some salt and pepper. I'm going to put this on low and I'm going to let it simmer for a few minutes, probably about 5 or so minutes, till the pasta cooks through. I love how convenient each of these meals are. You can make them up ahead of time and put them in your freezer, or you can just make them on the day that you'll be eating them. All of the recipes are linked below. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon.